Hello and welcome to another edition of NYABJ Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony, co-host of the Media Watch Committee.
And this is another edition of Media Watch, the show that tries to take a look at what's been done, good, bad, indifferent, or ugly in the media, and how well it's covered communities of color, people of color, and just the news in general. Thanks for joining us. And Bob, what do you think? We know when this airs next Monday, because we're taping on a Wednesday. There will still be some key stories that are still in the news, so why don't we backtrack, take a look at the big story first, and then work our way towards what will still be floating around. New York City primaries, about a week and a half ago.
Right. We got those out of the way with a couple surprises, but in terms of voting margin for some of the candidates. But yeah, we know that de Blasio obviously is the Democratic choice, and we know, but at this point, that Thompson and Quinn have joined, basically endorsed them just to keep the party faithful together. So we have that settled at this point.
Show of unity where the mayoral Democratic candidates are concerned. There was a little hesitation on Bill Thompson's point on whether he wanted to concede that de Blasio had gotten the requisite 40% so he would not need a runoff. And rather than push it to the hill, Mr. Thompson decided to concede and coalesce.
Right, saving himself time and the city money.
Certainly did save the city time and money.
Yes.
And maybe brought some unity to the Democratic Party. Now, the Republican side of that ticket, there were like maybe 3-4 candidates on the Republican side. Main guys were Loda and Katzimatidis,
Yes,
right? I've seen it spelled with a C and a K, but I believe the correct spelling is a C. And they had a knockdown kind of. They did.
They kind of went at it. Loda, being the former head of the MTA, had a bit of backing, and a former deputy mayor.
Yes,
he had a bit of backing from some big names.
Yes,
who were able to endorse him, and he had a little bit of money to
he
spend
did.
on the.
He got
so did his opponent.
But his opponent had his own money.
Yes,
so when you have money, you can run in New York City politics.
They were both pretty well funded, but Loda is the choice for the moment of the Republican Party, and he did something that his former boss didn't do. His former boss being Rudy Giuliani, he met with Al Sharpton, trying to show that he's his own person.
He took a page out of previous Republican candidates like John Lindsay, and made a concerted effort to reach out to communities of color to let them know that he was a candidate for the office of mayor. Mr. Giuliani and others before him on the Republican side never felt the need to do that.
No. So it was an interesting mood.
Right. I don't know if it was a gesture or not, or just something to get some news coverage, which always helps when you're running for mayor.
Which it absolutely did.
It certainly got news coverage. I always wonder, though. I guess I shouldn't, because if you want publicity, you pick a high-profile person to help you get that publicity. So whether or not Mr. Sharpton actually commands the voting populace of black New Yorkers is another question.
Not as he once did at one point in his career. Right. I hear you from that standpoint. But it was a surprise gesture.
It was definitely an interesting gesture. Yeah. But the interesting things about that, which is my long-time semi-political insight based on growing up collecting signatures on the streets of New York, as I've mentioned before.
Right.
I got a sense from sorry about that, folks. Forgot to turn off my cell phone.
It's okay. Little minor tech glitch.
Yes. I got a sense from the way a lot of these races turned out that New York voters in the Democratic primary were in a very unforgiving mood. If you take a look at what happened to Anthony Weiner, which was a total debacle despite all the money he spent,
right?
Which that's another matter of judgment, which we
Right.
know
That's a show in itself.
Right. We saw what happened to Elliot Spitzer, who I thought might have done better than he did.
I really thought he had. I thought Scott Stringer was under the radar low enough that Spitzer could easily just push him off the shelf. That didn't happen.
I had a sense that Spitzer might have gotten a backlash vote from New Yorkers who were not happy about the Wall Street moguls basically setting him up.
Yes.
And they may have done we'll show you guys, but they were not in a forgiving mood for the transgressions that he had actually done in his own personal life. So he did not do as well as I suspected. That's part of that unforgiving mood.
Sure.
Christine Quinn definitely bore the brunt of the unforgiving mood of the New York City voters, because they definitely were not happy about her being such a staunch supporter of Mr. Bloomberg and his disregarding the voters on term limits.
And there were a number of organized anti-Quinn efforts around the city. You saw them on the sidewalks, you saw them in the subway stations. They weren't even supporting any other candidate. At least they said they weren't. The folks, we know they were funded by the opponents, but there was a lot of anti-Quinn fervor being spread.
Indeed.
Actively, and so she was hurt by that, and I think the low turnout didn't help anybody.
I'm still riding this unforgiving mood.
Yes, I absolutely agree with the unforgiving mood.
Or just the whiff of any kinds of impropriety. I would have bet money that John Liu would have been in a much stronger position in that primary than he turned out to be. And I'm chalking that up to, one, not as much fund, as you mentioned earlier, not as much funding, and the fact that he didn't get the additional funding from the control board. Again, forgive me, folks. The fact that he got a whiff of scandal from his campaign workers,
from his associates.
Yes,
not
from him.
Didn't track all the way back to him.
Nobody pointed any.
The stink, unfortunately, stuck.
That's exactly right.
And he did not. So, and between that and the lack of the matching funds, which he did not get for a number of reasons.
Yep.
It really undercut him. I really thought he was going to be in the play.
I thought he was going to do a lot better. So when you add those up, and even the biggest surprise in Brooklyn, the DA's race, where Charles Hines got totally surprised by Ken Thompson. And now, Ken Thompson was not that high a profile candidate for the office. He was a much higher profile civil rights attorney, and he took on some really strong cases. Matter of fact, folks, we had Ken Thompson on Media Watch at least twice, maybe 3 times, dealing with a number of civil rights cases, workplace discrimination cases, the Sandra Guzman case against the Post. He was here talking to us about that.
Okay.
He was here on, I think, the Strauss-Kahn case. That's when we tried to get him on. I don't think he came on for that one.
Okay.
But he was here for another case that involved workplace discrimination.
So as a defense attorney, he's absolutely well known.
He's well known and very, very sharp. And that reputation came across evidently in his campaign. So and Charles Hines got hit with that whiff of corruption and scandal.
Being part of the machine.
There you go.
That was unfortunately
it was
what
just,
stuck on him.
It was just amazing. And I just chalked those lists up. I said, very unforgiving set of voters, this primary election. Anybody that was anywhere near a hint of scandal or wrongdoing, they were not going to get a pass by the New York City voters. It's going to be interesting to watch. The one key race that most people didn't pay any attention to, but because I had come across Letitia James on a couple of occasions at city council hearings where she was testifying on certain issues, I got to know her, so I was very interested in that public advocate race. And it turned out that her high-profile city council presence was as strong as Daniel Squadron's state senate presence, so they came into a almost virtual dead heat. in that primary, and neither one got the required 40%. So this public advocate office is going to have a really knockdown, drag-out battle, I think.
I think it will be. I don't think they'll attack each other heavily, because I think they're pretty much friends, and they draw from the same community. So they really don't want the knockdown, drag-out fight. But
I hope you're right.
But they both want that same office, though.
Yeah.
And that tends to change
I
things.
think, let's keep our fingers crossed that it stays on the high road. But it would not surprise me to see a little bit of dirt start to get tossed slightly, even if there's no real mudslinging. But let's hope everybody stays on the high road.
I've met them both at different times, and
they seem to be
they seem to draw
people
from the same community, support the same issues.
Yeah.
And as you know, the public advocate position is a stepping stone position.
It can be, yes, because we've seen it work this time.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I can see people starting to eye that office futurely. So this is Media Watch. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And, this is the show that we do in conjunction with EBT Educational Productions and the New York Association of Black Journalists. And it's the report card show, how the media is doing.
Right. And we don't give them passes.
No, we don't.
We really, we try to assess it. If they do good work, we definitely give them the pluses.
So by the time we go to air, there will be a couple of key stories nationally and internationally. The one that's probably going to be still in the news while they're taking speculation on what caused it and why is, of course, the Navy Yard shooting in Washington, D.C. that took place this current week. When we air, it'll be last week.
Right.
Your take first on the coverage of the story, Bob, before we get into it.
Okay. And that's what always surprises me, and unfortunately always seems to disappoint me. The initial coverage that we get when we have breaking news of that type.
Right.
Because I did due diligence and I tuned in WINS. I tried to pick it up on TV, and some TV stations were going with it. Some just ran their usual programming. Yeah. And I tried to watch the tweets, and just a jumbled mess of initial information from the three shooters, and we got some inkling as to what he looked like in terms of skin color being bandied about by some of the outlets.
No, it was pretty much all day once they started running the story with, a dark-skinned person.
Right.
Which this time they were correct. As opposed to the Boston Marathon shooting.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that the same kind of errors that were fomented during the Boston Marathon bombings basically were repeating themselves with this shooting. And what I tuned into it later in the day and in the evening, and I was still sort of surprised that there was not more concrete reporting that would say, look, we know exactly this, A, B, C, and D, and that's pretty much all we know. There's speculation about X, Y, and Z, but that's pure. I didn't hear any of that. I just heard, well, we don't know what's going on much. We think, and I was very, very disappointed in what I was hearing.
The reporting was shallow. It was just as what you were saying, we're outside the complex. We don't know what happened, but this is what we have heard from a couple of people, and it was so just sort of top of the table, nothing in depth. Well, nothing that showed that any hard reporting was being done.
That somebody had gone somewhere and tried to dig up some information.
You do that by talking to people who are coming out. You do that to, you actually can, if you want to, make a phone call into the complex and see if someone picks up. I mean, there's, normally you wouldn't do that in this situation because it's dangerous. You don't want to tip people off that you're there. But there are ways to do some reporting, even in this.
I saw some reports on one of my typical good sourcing for media assessment on Richard Prince's journalism blog, and he was talking about, quoting the other sources that were talking about how the initial Twitter feeds were just as crazy and just as misleading because they were quoting sometimes from police scanners, which you know, when police scanners
Yes,
start
and-
running stuff on
Yeah,
scanners,
and you and I-
half
you
the
and I-
time, the scanners don't know what's going on.
You
so
and
if
I
you're
have
going to
just-
repeat that,
Yeah, you and I have both done police reporting, and what comes over the scanner is just what some patrolman on the sidewalk thinks he saw.
it's guessing.
It is not fact just because a
right.
person with a badge saw it.
Just because it comes from a police scanner doesn't make it accurate,
No,
so you can't
and-
be repeating that.
And even in my newspaper days, we weren't going by what was there. We would send a
You got
reporter.
to send your guy on the scene, send your lady to the scene, get what your people, get it from your people. Don't repeat what somebody else is repeating and speculating.
And if I could mention, but before I came to this session to record this show, I was at a Future of Television program where the
okay.
chief digital officer of NBC News was there.
All right.
She's talking about a new service that NBC News just purchased called StringWire.
Okay.
It's an existing site.
What's the
And
basis?
And let's say it was up and running for the shooting. Let's say you were tweeting that someone had gotten shot. You know, you were in the compound. You had tweeted it, and it went out. StringWire allows them to monitor the tweets, and to then, if they see your tweet, they can send out a public tweet with a link. You click that link, and your phone can go live from wherever you are. They're not going to put that on the air instantly. They're going to put it. They're going to see
monitor it.
They can monitor it,
Okay.
and if they think that you have a legitimate feed and they trust you, and they can have multiple feeds coming in from multiple people, they can more or less crowdsource some video and try to get some facts that way
Before they put
as
it
the reporter
out.
is still heading to the scene.
And they have the capability of editing
They
delayed.
absolutely-
They don't have to put
They
that into
absolutely,
a live stream.
No, I wouldn't dare put that into
Okay.
a live stream.
All right.
It needs curation from a good editor, which is
Okay.
what you and I always argue about.
Yes.
No matter what technology you use, it has to be well
Somebody
edited.
has to double check,
So-
triple check, fact check, if you want to be accurate.
Right, but as you were saying, the tweets were just out of hand for a while.
Yeah, yeah. And so in the new day of practicing journalism, where everyone wants to get their piece of information out, whether they've had any journalism training or not, you run the risk of getting a lot of stuff just floating in the ether.
Excuse me.
That, bless you,
Thank you.
that can be very misleading, very inaccurate, and can cause a lot of confusion and sometimes a lot of harm, as we know from people who were unjustly accused in the Boston
Sure.
Marathon bombing. And there were a couple of people in this Navy Yard shooting who were supposedly possible suspects initially that the cops finally managed to vet and say
Right.
those are not suspects.
Absolutely,
okay.
right.
So yeah, the lesson still has not been learned.
No,
and
we're still not doing our due diligence all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So the other heavy, big ticket item that I know we need to touch on is the Syrian situation. But didn't you have something pertaining
tweet related?
tweet related on a more cultural story?
Sure,
but
sure.
a big national story just the same.
Sure, a little bit lighter, but still a little bit disappointing in the recent.
Yeah, not light,
No,
but
okay.
very
No,
disappointing.
yes. But in Miss
Just what
the-
last week?
Yeah, last week.
weekend.
as of
yeah.
this airing, I guess.
Yeah.
The Miss America contest returned to Atlantic City, and the winner was, for the second year in a row, by the way, Miss New York. Not the same person, but the person
Ooh.
representing Miss New
Wow,
York.
I didn't know that. 2 years in a row.
Yes.
Miss New York won.
Yes, we have. That's the only winning team we seem to have
How
in town
about
at the moment. But the winner for the first time is a woman named Nina Davuluri, and she's of Indian descent with dark skin.
Indian from subcontinent India.
Yes, as opposed to Native American, right? True Indian from India.
Right.
But almost immediately on Twitter, we got a string of racist tweets saying, and among the few that I can say is Miss 7-Eleven.
Miss 7-Eleven.
You know,
Oh, okay.
bit
Alluding to the fact that a number of Indians or people from the subcontinent
right.
have franchises with
Right.
7-Eleven.
Run convenience stores, being the stereotype. Or Ms. Al-Qaeda was another one.
Ooh, that's kind of vicious.
And we have a few referring to her as not an American, and of course she is
born native New Yorker.
She's American for sure.
Born here.
Yes.
May not have been born in New York, but lived in New York.
Absolutely.
Became Miss New York.
Long enough to qualify for the contest. So we had a whole string of tweets, and only a handful of them have apologized. I actually tracked some of the tweets myself, and I noticed that 90 or 80% of the Twitter accounts were deleted by the person doing the tweeting. They got sick of the backlash.
Okay.
There was you can tweet back, as you know.
Yeah, the typical cowardly behavior of folk who see that reminds me of this quote rise in cyberbullying, because I remember reading just about 4 or 5 days ago, a week ago now, about this young 12-year-old child in Florida who committed suicide just because she had been bullied, not only at school but incessantly in cyberspace,
in Facebook, etc., or wherever it was. I'm not sure if it was Facebook.
I think they deleted her parents killed the Facebook account, but she opened a couple of other accounts where she thought they might be safe. A bunch of small sites,
right?
But there's still these
they still went after her.
These social media sites. They found her there. They targeted her with statements like, "Why don't you die already? Why don't you kill yourself?" I mean, some seriously vicious things. And so she ended up actually committing suicide.
Unfortunately, taking that advice.
And so that's the kind of bullying, that kind of cowardly hiding behind your anonymity online. It's becoming even more prevalent, and basically the folks who really wouldn't want to face you and deal with you, except in a crowd, not one-on-one.
It's the same gutless type of crowd or gang
behavior. It's abominable. It's reprehensible, and maybe the folk in Florida might be able to do some legal repercussions against them. I think the sheriff is looking into it. I think maybe we'll try to keep an eye on that story and update you on it when we learn more about it.
In case there's any civil rights actions or
anything that might cause some folk to have to pay the price for causing that child to lose her life.
Right. It was. I remember reading it for the first time, and you hear about the danger of such things, but it's trouble when it happens.
Yeah, you know, kids are so vulnerable when they're young anyway, because they don't have a sense of self yet. And so for a 12-year-old to have to be going through that is just unfortunate and not something for anyone to be proud of. But all right, that's not to go into anything that's even better, but the Syrian situation will still be with us when this show airs, and the question that we've wrestled with on a number of occasions on dealing with these issues: who's right, who's wrong, what's the real issue? And I saw a Roland Martin column online when I was doing some research. And his take was there are no right and wrong in the Syrian situation, because there are good arguments for why we should strike because of the atrocities that were done, and there are real good reasons why we shouldn't strike, etc. And he's right in the way he phrased the argument, showing both sides. But what I thought it lacked for me, and it's not an easy thing to try to come to grips with, but you set aside whether it's within the national interests of the United States, because those are the arguments that we always hear in the halls of Congress, and our elected officials show us why we should be there. So you have to take a look at the historical arc of what that thing represents. And those conventions, the Geneva Convention, whatever that anti-chemical warfare thing was that most of the countries in the globe signed
off
in 1925. I mean, the first one was way back. It was right after World War I, but they discovered it was so atrocious using chemical weapons and stuff like that that you just said, no, we're not going to do this. So they signed these conventions, and all these countries signed on. Guess what? We did too. And so there are international agreements that says you are supposed to punish people who do that.
All right.
And they reiterated it in 1993, and that's so you can put your foot down so that people just won't keep doing that. So you don't have to say, is it in our interest? It's in the interest of the agreements that we signed way back when. So you either keep your word by the agreements you sign, or you're just like those cyber bullies. they turn and run when it hits the fan. I'm not saying dropping a bomb is going to solve the problem, but you have to figure out a way to make those people pay for violating those international conventions.
So you're looking for some kind of really serious enforcement.
You need to do something.
Okay.
I mean, but it's not just that the United States need to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're put in that position because the president, understanding about those international agreements, Mr. International, Mr. Constitutional, he knows this country signed those agreements. So he was the one sticking his neck out saying there's a red line he cannot cross. The rest of the world say, yeah, you're right, but they're not helping him make this right. So yeah, I understand that nobody wants to be in another war, and I'm with him. I don't want us to be in a war either.
Okay.
I've been there, I've done that, don't want to do that again.
Okay.
Nature of the beast is, though, you got to live up to your agreements, and you got to make people, it's like in World War II, a lot of people are too young and don't know when Neville Chamberlain went over and said, oh yes, I've seen Hitler and he's a nice guy and he's not a bad guy, and yes, we've made peace in our time, and he just proceeded to run right over Poland. And he'd already done some bad things when they went over there to talk to him. So you cannot just sit back and do nothing.
You can't diplomacy.
That's my point.
Okay.
So
I get you.
So
I can follow you that far. I mean, it is a weird.
It's a weird thing, but all these people talking about, show me what's in our national interest. That's not your argument.
Okay.
The atrocities that were perpetrated were against international conventions that you signed on, should never ever happen again.
Okay.
So I mean, that's me as the semi-pacifist former military person.
Right. But you want the international community to come together.
They're supposed to. It's not just the U.S. that's supposed to be making this guy pay.
Right.
I mean, but the nature of the beast is, at least he stepped up to the plate and say he needs to pay.
Okay.
I give him credit for that. I don't give him credit for saying, okay, let's go to Congress, because we know Congress is going to waffle and wiggle.
Okay.
He lucked out when the Russians said, oh yeah, we'll help you. We'll get those weapons and we get them destroyed.
All right, we have about 45 seconds left in our broadcast.
Oh, okay. There was probably one other story, but you know what? We can deal.
We'll have plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, there'll be others. What's coming up that we need? Oh yeah, I know what's coming up that we need to alert our viewers on. Keep your eye on how the story gets covered and how the narrative is played out when the, quote, continuing resolution to not fund the government comes up in the next week or two. And then after that, the debt ceiling, because guess what? It's not going to be talked about in any nonpartisan way. It's going to be a he said, she said.
4.
Okay. This has been NYBJ Media Watch, done with EVT Educational Productions. Bob Anthony, Eric Tait, thanks for joining us.